doing the same thing, but hopefully maybe new take. I doubt it. I doubt it. No. It's the same exact lab.
Yeah, it's the
but
same.
we're along for the ride. Come on.
Hi, I'm Christian Lang. I'm part of Group 3. I'm doing the same presentation that Lily did. And so, okay. So the goals of the experiment are to record the transient response of a thermocouple by looking at changes in temperature going from room temperature to cold or room temperature to hot and vice versa. And you're going to want to put all of the results in graphs, and it should help us understand everything about transient conduction, time constants, thermocouples, and other basic heat transfer properties like that. So the background of it is that, as he said, with the Biot number and the Fourier transform being below certain values, you're allowed to use lumped capacitance method that says that the temperature difference between something that's being heated on an outside is distributed equally throughout, or it's like more contained within the center and less on the edges. So it uses the transient conduction heat energy analysis, which is this equation above, and then if you substitute in this for the time constant and use the natural log, you can get a more simplified version of the equation that allows you to find things like time constant and amount of time taken based off of temperature differences and time elapsed and stuff like that. So the apparatus needed, you're going to need a type K thermocouple, and it's supposed to say 1 originally when I was making this, and I read the experiment, I read it wrong and I forgot to update it. So it's supposed to be 1 500 milliliter beaker, half full of water, and depending on if you have the boiling water or the ice water experiment, you're going to need one or the other, and you're going to need computer systems with the data acquisition capabilities and the paper towels. And so for the procedure, what you're going to do is you're going to take your thermocouple, and depending on which one you have, you're going to start at room temperature and dunk it into the water and wait for it to kind of level out and record your responses, and do the same thing the opposite way. So start with thermocouple in the water and pull it out and dry it. Try to negate as much outside heat transfer as you can. And so for the predicted results, we're looking for the graphs to show logarithmic temperature changes over time. Obviously, if the way that one looks for the ice water, it should look the other way for the boiling water because temperature increase versus temperature decrease. You should see that it takes longer for the time constants, or the time constants will be greater when you pull the thermocouple out rather than inserting it into the new water apparatus. And you should find that if you use all the values from the experiment in theoretical predictions, that they should line up similarly. And some places that uncertainties can come from are from the thermocouple, any computing errors or calculation errors, as well as human errors and errors in the experiment. And that's it. Any questions?
So you mentioned the PDAC. Is that the same as the MIDAC we use?
Yeah, something close to like that.
PDAC?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, and I saw Lewis raise his hand next.
Should the time constant be the same, like going into the boiling water and coming out of it?
I mean, it just kind of depends because I think it's something to do with like it takes longer for something to cool down than for it to heat up, or like since it's in a more direct atmosphere inside of the water, and the heat transfer coefficient of the water might be greater than the heat transfer coefficient of the air, you might see that the time constant will take longer for one rather than the other.
What's the difference between the PDAC and the MIDAC?
Don't ask me.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions, lovely presentation.
Thank you.
Even better. All right. So
like I said, Devin Powell is my name. I figured a good first 6-minute talk at the beginning of the semester would be a little bit of the history of like how we've gotten to the understanding of where we are with thermodynamics. Obviously, what we were talking about before, it's pretty in depth, kind of confusing. I know I get kind of glossy eyed when we get too in depth of it, so thought we could take a little appreciation of who got us there. So these are some of the main players. We're not going to do a timeline of from point A to point B to point C and so on, because thermodynamic history is all convoluted and intertangled. Example of that, the second law came before the first law by like 25 years. So we're not doing that. We're just going to touch on some of the main guys. So the first one we'll talk about is Gabriel Fahrenheit. Obviously, by his last name, he dealt with temperatures. He made the first mercury thermometer, which is very important to us to be able to, first take accurate temperature measurements. So next, we're going to talk about Antoine Lavoisier. Lavoisier, he came up with the caloric theory. I don't know if y'all, Dr. D kind of touched on that when we had him. Pretty much what the caloric theory is it was the first kind of thought process of how heat transfer happened. So he said, you've got an object and it's got caloric particles in the ether. That was like a quantum term. You could throw it at anything. It's just, it's in the ether. And it's supposed to be little particles that flow without restriction in an object. Obviously, it wasn't wrong, but it was a good starting ground to see how energy flows through hot to cold. That was his big contribution. Benjamin Thompson, aka Count Rumford. This guy, he was obsessed with cannons. He saw that when you were boring out a cannon, so like cutting out a hole, not like me boring y'all to sleep, it produced a lot of heat. So his thought was like, okay, maybe caloric theory isn't exactly right because, this isn't particles getting just, just magically created. It's mechanical work being transferred into heat energy. So that was kind of like the first little needle that was breaking the caloric theory back. So one of the cool things that he did with this, he sunk the whole setup here where they're boring out the cannon into water, and it started boiling water by the time they finished boring out the entire thing. So that was like a light bulb going off like, oh, this is a lot of heat getting generated from mechanical energy. So moving on, we got James Watt. He dealt a lot with steam engines. His boss came to him before he was the famous James Watt and was like, hey, I've got a broken steam engine, come fix it. So that steam engine was a Newcomb style steam engine. It was very inefficient. It lost about 90% of the energy put in. So you got 10 pounds of coal that you burn, 9 pounds of it is just lost by friction and heat losses. So James Watt came in, and as a good engineer, he fixed it, but also proposed a improvement, which was add a condenser, and it made the whole thing more efficient. So it dropped from 90% losses to about 75% losses, which was huge in that time. Saved a lot of money. That's why, he's got a unit named after his last name as well. So next we got Sadi Carnot. We all know the Carnot cycle. Love it or hate it, he is the father of thermodynamics. He was obsessed with trying to figure out the limits of efficiency on a thermodynamic cycle or an engine. He focused on the piston cylinder like we all know. Obviously it was all adiabatic, isothermal, perfect conditions possible. It's not real, but it was a great, great formulation and really kind of changed the game when he came around. Unfortunately, he died at the age of 36, so he didn't get to see his work come to fruition. So don't be like Sadi Carnot. James Joule, he also has a unit named after him, the Joule. And the base units for Joule directly relates to his paddle experiment. So it was a whole thing, I'm sure you'll remember, if you raise a kilogram of weight a certain height, it'll heat up a certain volume of water by a certain temperature. He went through and did exactly that. On the other side of this, there was a weight that spun this shaft, and there's paddles in this little container of water, and he was able to drop this 1 kilogram down and measure the temperature difference when the paddle starts swirling. So just a direct relation of mechanical energy to heat energy, which was very, very groundbreaking at the time. This one of the most influential definitions for thermodynamics is the first and second law. It's the Clausius definitions from Rudolf Clausius. He was the first person to like put a name to entropy and kind of formulate it in one concise thing. So I'm gonna read them directly because they're that important. So first of all, heat can never pass from a colder to a warmer body without some other change connected there within occurring at the same time. Pretty much saying, can't go from cold to hot. Second law, the energy of the universe is constant and the entropy of the universe tends to a maximum. So what that is saying, it pretty much describes why you can't do time travel. You know, the entropy always has to increase, it can never decrease. So obviously that is huge. I know Dr. D harped on that for a good little while whenever we were in his class. So hopefully I didn't bore you all to death, but that's pretty much all the main guys. Hopefully we can appreciate all they've done. So thank you. Any questions?
Were there any mothers of thermodynamics?
No, but kind of a fun one. Antoine Lavoisier's wife later married, I think it was Count Rumford. So she got to help on both sides of caloric theory. So proving it and then disproving it.
So she's the wife of thermodynamics.
Yeah, wife of thermodynamics. The first lady of thermodynamics.
Alright, you go.
Why is the person that made the first and second law of thermodynamics?
Do it.
Why is the first person that made the first and second law of thermodynamics not named after him?
It's a great question. So the first and second law, almost every one of these guys, probably about half of them, came up with their own little version of it. So like it's very messy. That's the intertangledness of the history. So I don't fully understand.
Any more questions? Well,
Oh, I got one.
Oh, go
How did he
ahead.
die? You said he died at 36. Was it like health? Was
Yeah,
it
it was one of the typhoid fever or something like that.
Alright, and I have one question.
Okay.
What's your favorite fun fact that wasn't thermodynamic related from any of those guys?
Favorite fun fact, non-thermodynamic related.
Fun way they died.
Something
like that.
Kind of gruesome.
I didn't get to talk about Rudy Rudolph Diesel, but I like him. He made the first diesel engine, so it ran off of peanut oil. So I thought that was cool.
Alright,
Very efficient.
well, that was a lovely talk.
Thank you.
And I believe that's all we have for today. Good job.
good job, reporters?
Yeah. Let's get some more out of it.